sharing your screen, and the floor is yours.
Tansil, we cannot hear you yet.
Asik, you are on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Uh, is this working?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me and for this opportunity, actually. This is like the last possible minute reflection. I mean, I wish I had more time for reflection, but you know how it happens in academia. So I'm just running into this. But I have been listening to, since this morning, and I must say the conversations, I mean, has been absolutely amazing, but particularly I will draw a lot from what Gautam was saying today, this morning, because I can relate why why I can relate with him is because I think the common connection with Ananya Roy. So I had the pleasure of meeting her and having a workshop with her when I was doing my PhD in Melbourne. So this was some of this conversation about, moving beyond knowledge production is actually influenced by her. But in any case, I'll just start off, and I'll start off. Let's see if the slides work. Okay, so I'll start from a very conventional academic piece of knowledge production that we recently finished. So this is with the work is with Ifadul Haq, who is an urban planner currently at Smith College in the United States, and we were looking at we're trying to um, see kind of like the differentiation between policy space and knowledge at policy level and what happens on the ground. So for both of our PhD research projects, we were embedded, doing ethnographic research in the largest informal settlement in Dhaka, Bangladesh. But then, as I'll explain, we started looking into the different policies that impact or actually don't impact informal dwellers in global south cities. So I'll just go into this slightly, and then I'll show you what the current work that I'm doing and how, whether it reflects Southern values or not. But I mean, I can only do what I'm doing. So just a little bit of background for going into that. Is this a typical global south mega city? I don't know, but Dhaka, it's about 400,000 people moving in every year, about 5,000 informal settlements, and the last time we did a proper count, it was 3.5 million people. But of course, these are constructed in some ways, because how you include who is an informal dweller and who is not. So all of this is quite contested, and I've written about sort of like this definitions elsewhere. I'll not go into the detail for that. What we were trying to look at is how many of these people were moving due to climate change related issues, and in very clearly from our ethnographic data and other empirical sources, there is a very strong uptick of people moving due to environmental reasons. These stories are quite similar. So this is from one of the residents who's long-term lived there, how they've lost their land to the river, and how they have moved. So there's this multiple levels of displacement until they end up in the capital city. And then interestingly, just being in the capital city in informal settlement doesn't end the uncertainty and the everyday uncertainty of living. As we'll show you through, evictions, fires, and floods, all of this has remained. So, if you see the last point she makes, she says life hasn't changed, even though she's here 30 years now. So these were sort of like the ethnographic ground from which we were arriving, because a lot of these people said they were, and the stories revealed that they were climate migrants, uh, but they had no support from the national policy space. For the sake of time, not just going to go into the story, the second one, but you get a sense that the reason that we were really finding it difficult to reconcile in our heads is that at the same time we see that in policy space, Bangladesh, and this is where geopolitics of knowledge comes in. So Bangladesh is now touted as one of the is a model for climate migration. It's so we regularly get awards at United Nations, United Nations conventions, and the policy that we craft is now shipped off to other global south and countries for being a like almost this poster child of how to deal with climate change by a global south country. So this is and this is picked up by, as you can see, global north media outlets. The interesting thing is, this is where sort of like our quest began, is how come I'm getting is scale, but we have migrants who are not accounted for. So I'll start with sort of like three incongruences that we see. As you can see, I'll start with the last one. So if you see the last one, the incongruence between climate discourse and how it's framed as environmental mega projects, and this is sort of projected by global or northern financial institute or multilaterals like such as the IMF or World Bank, versus the local climate action that Gautam was talking about, sort of you do what you can attitude, incrementalist, informal adaptations that happen on the ground, but none of this is registered. So so none of this is registered in the climate policy discourse, or the policies that are crafted have absolutely no visibility towards the small scale climate actions. And then on the other hand, so because we're looking at intersection between climate and housing, the reality and housing as a planning and policy object. Now, this we arrived at because we worked as an external reviewer for the current master plan for Dhaka, which is for the next 20 years, which interestingly, acknowledges a lot of the informality. So informality with regards to housing, with regards to informal trading. It acknowledges that 51% of the city is housed informally. So the master plan does that, but then there is no planning policy for these informal dwellers. So there is no strategic action. So there is this incongruence between recognizing something and then not really doing something about it. And this recognition itself is actually coming quite far for these planners, because in the previous master plan there was an absolute non-recognition of any informality in the city. But this incongruence still remains. The third incongruence is between the civic discourse and housing rights, which is still focused on recognition. So this came out of our engagement or working with BLAST. BLAST stands for Bangladesh Legal Action Aid and Services Trust, which is the largest legal organization that provides pro bono legal services to slum dwellers in Bangladesh. So, to pause evictions. And as you can see on the right, sort of like we kind of like it's almost like a satirical piece where we talk about how the Supreme Court started to become like a planner for the urban poor in the city. So these are like different incongruences we started to see, which we were, and as I said, we're working with, on one hand, we were doing workshops with the locals, and then on the other hand, we were actually working with the legal practitioners and lawyers, and very different sets of discourses. that did not acknowledge one or the other. So all these incongruences, discursive partition is sort of like our theoretical attempt to frame this. So we see that the national legislation plans advocate strong housing rights, but the national climate policies have no idea about migrant housing. So there is this in the same policy, there is this partition between that. As I said, the national and urban plans recognize migration and housing, but again, no plans. Now, the national level plans, it actually, the reason for these plans getting awarded is because these are really well thought out abstract plans. So for example, community land trust. So the national level plan asks the local authorities to set up land redistribution policies such as a community land trust. But when that national level plan goes into an urban level project, an urban level plan, then it has nothing in there. So no translation across policies. And it's not a question of recognition, because at the national level, the plans recognize. So what we argue is that there is this production of these gaps beyond weak governance excuses, the lack of coordination, that oftentimes global South cities, any problem is usually attributed to this idea of a lack of coordination between agencies and about a lack of resource. But we don't buy that anymore, because, so for example, in Dhaka, the master plan costs us like around 100 million in consultancy fees. So it's absolutely not a lack of resource by which these gaps are produced. So on the other hand, what we see on the ground, for example, local planning activities. So for example, this was informal planning and execution that happened to tackle COVID-19 in the settlements. A lot of organization that happened, but that remains invisible. So not only that, the urban level project plans have an invisibility towards, actually good policies at a national scale. They don't also acknowledge the local epistemics as well. So this is another. And of course, there are lots of papers in the last 10 years, as Gautam was mentioning, which kind of like is starting to chart the empiric register of all these different housing practices and informal practices. So for example, this was a fire. Even before the government help arrived, the local action was, and they did the reconstruction job faster than the actual government help. So all of this does not happen with these practices, do not happen without a level of theoretical understanding and planning protocols. But none of these, as I said, make into the way that the city is officially planned or even thought of. So where this leaves us is, this is when we were talking with the people on the ground, they're fed up of research. So the local community leaders are tired of research. They keep telling me that we are tired of people coming from the Global North Institutes and asking us about all of these things, and they come and they do focus group discussions. They talk about resilience. So they're really well equipped. They know all these words. They're like, oh yes, SDG, yeah, we're tired of it now. Yeah, and so there is this sort of a recognition of our inability as researchers to engage, not to engage with what they actually want. And this is where we are kind of like working towards what to do with such analytics. So if we say there is this partition that's happening, a discursive partition that has happened throughout, so what to do with such an analytics? So this is exactly what I'm working on right now, and this is pretty much my to-do list, and it's actually happening right now. So we're working on a grant which is using a global north terminology. So we use knowledge exchange and impact funding, which is not considered as research. So we are applying for a knowledge exchange and impact project, but actually what we're doing inside of it is co-creating departitioning actions with local community leaders. And we're sort of like moving beyond the so-called policy level dialogues, because I think there's also a saturation point with that, because as I said, the national level policies are well constructed, but it's that local translation that's lagging behind. So we are sort of working on that. We have built what we call a platform for just housing, or in Bangla, it's called Najjo Abasan Moncho, which is a bridge between academia, formal and informal practice, state, and NGOs. So this is the work that's been going on right now, but all under sort of like the name of research. And this is where I have been sort of like moving back and forth from working with the community is in the very northern part. You can see the river in the back, and then coming back to the city. And this is a more formal Institute of Architects, reflection seminar that I was giving. And this thread, what I'm coming to is, this is something that I've been working on. Catalina is here. This is something that it started off as a response to the RC21, very rightly calling for a decolonizing urban knowledge production. So we have been testing and thinking about this notion of dirty research, which is a lot of the research is moving. The notion of research being moving beyond purely knowledge production and producing journal articles and that knowledge, but also being actively understanding that what we do impacts things on the ground and taking ownership of that impact. So this has been going on for some time. The piece that I wrote for Catalina and others, I think it's coming out in 2024. I hope. We hope, yes, fingers crossed. But this sort of conceptualizes the notion beyond research as a pure knowledge production, that beyond that. So it looks at the lived reality of doing research. And I'm really interested in this, the notion that the Black studies, coming from Black studies, that Abdul Simon refers to, Harney and Moten's work on the undercommons, the idea that the way that it is set up right now, one can only sneak into, and this is probably like a northern sense of university, and steal what one can, to abuse its hospitality, to spice its mission, to join its refugee colony, its gypsy encampment, to be in but not off. This is the path of the subversive intellectual in the modern university. So we kind of like, I'm really drawn towards that. So for me, departitioning actions, since knowledge production officially ends, after that, there is a lot more that can be done, that is to be done. And these are like some of that, work that we have been doing, as I told you before, but this is sort of like framing that larger discourse. So yeah, so pretty much that's what I had. I mean, I prepared for 10 minutes, or I don't,
No,
I
that
think
was
it's
great.
okay, right?
That was
But
really, really powerful. Thank you.
I'll just end with a bit of an advertisement for my book, which is coming out from Bloomsbury. This is the settlement that I have been working on for now 16 years. And hopefully it's like a Southern biography, and I'll see where it goes. So yeah, just I have been asked by Bloomsbury to do as much marketing as possible. So I'm following that line. Okay, all right. Thank you so much.
Southern marketing tactics. Thank you very much,
So I'll
Okay.
just stop sharing. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much. We're going to give this one last try and do a quick little switcheroo to Lou's computer.